The four players froze, frozen in icy horror, as something unthinkable appeared before them, like something out of a nightmare. The elite monster advanced with a heavy, inexorable gait, and there was no time to think. The battle was as inevitable as an approaching storm. Just outside the gates of the starting village, the four encountered a poisonous level 4 spider, an ominous stroke of luck, as if fate itself had orchestrated this fateful encounter. Realizing that the forces were too unequal, the players darted away like frightened birds that had fallen from a branch. Suddenly, another player rushed past like a whirlwind, straight into the monster's open clutches, as if defying death itself. The others were stunned, unable to believe it. This was pure suicide, since defeating the elite required a raid of at least 10 people. One of them cynically said with a wry smile, "We'll take this madman's gear when he falls." For the others, the game remained entertainment, a fleeting amusement, but for the guy, it was a matter of life and death, the last hope. The spider raised its paw, sharp as a honed blade, preparing to deliver a fatal blow from which there would be no escape. His eyes glowed with a crimson fire, and every step he took sent sparks flying from the ground, as if the very soil were groaning under his weight. The boy who challenged the monster was already poisoned. Time was quickly slipping through his fingers like sand in an hourglass. Peering out from their hiding place, the others were already mentally dividing up his equipment, anticipating easy prey. And then he rushed around the spider, fast as a meteor, leaving behind only a blurry trail. At that moment, the Eye of Insight was revealed to him, an ancient gift that allows one to see the hidden vulnerabilities of an enemy. The next moment, the sword cut through the air with a piercing whistle, and the monster shuddered from the powerful blow, feeling pain for the first time. The guy's gaze was filled with icy confidence, cold and unshakable, like the steel of a tempered blade. He then thrust his sword hard into the ground, cementing his resolve as if imprinting it into reality itself. The other players couldn't believe their eyes. The game had only started a day ago, and this guy was putting out incredible damage numbers, but even that was barely enough against the ruthless elite. The blow of the spider's legs, heavy and crushing, threw the guy back like a rag doll. He didn't loosen his grip on the chain wrapped around the weapon, as his health bar inexorably melted away drop by drop. With one swift movement, he snatched up the vial of medicine. As expected from an elite, the passive damage from the poison was draining his strength at an alarming rate, and there was no time to waste. The player named Big Dream had no class, his stats left much to be desired, and his luck was zero. He was practically invisible in this vast world. But the blows of his sword found their target with frightening accuracy, doubling and tripling the damage, as if fate itself had suddenly decided to play along with him. The elite monster had no intention of retreating. Its huge paw was already hanging over the enemy, blocking the sky. Big Dream was ready to meet this blow head-on, without looking away, as if challenging fate itself. With one hand, he clutched the chain, while with the other, he struck with lightning-fast precision with his sword, turning the chaos of battle into a polished symphony of steel. The monster's critical strike shook the earth, causing it to tremble as if struck by thunder. Onlookers from the bushes shouted, trying to hide the trembling in their voices. "Respawn and try again." Big Dream realized the gravity of the threat. One more drop of damage, and his character would turn to dust, dissipating like the morning fog. The warm-up was over. Now the real battle began, where everything was at stake. With a sharp jerk, Big Dream yanked the chain. With a loud clang, it tightened into knots on the swords, weaving into a deadly web. The chain became an impenetrable barrier around the spider, a trap from which there was no escape. Another powerful jerk. The tension became steely, merciless, leaving the enemy no chance. With each strike of the sword, sparks flew out of the links like small lightning bolts, illuminating the darkness with flashes of light. The poisonous spider weakened before our eyes, its defenses crumbling, falling apart like old armor and dropping to zero. The unwitting spectators could not hide their amazement. The trap of a pair of rusty swords worked like a masterstroke, and the elite monster was practically paralyzed. Big Dream rejoiced, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. The reward for his first kill was already beckoning to him, promising a new chapter. With a triumphant cry that mingled relief and rage, he dealt the final blow to the monster. Victory was his. It rang in the air like a victory bell. The news of the first kill of an elite monster in the north spread throughout the world like wildfire, engulfing more and more lands. The game chat immediately erupted into debate about Big Dream and his rewards. Someone hissed that he was just a rich daddy who bought top-end gear to appear stronger. But Big Dream was not one of those. There was no room for easy paths in his story. His real name was Zhang Liu, and he only had 6 months to live, as if fate had already sealed his fate. He was burning with an incurable disease, myasthenic syndrome, which was slowly but surely sucking the life out of him. The doctor promised a couple more years of medication, but the family from the poor old neighborhood could no longer afford the treatment, and hope faded with each passing day. And then a message from an old pen pal changed his fate, like turning a page to reveal a new story. New Origin Point is a global VR game based on the spiritual world discovered by scientists inside a meteorite, like a fragment of another reality. It blew up the world immediately after its release, and something incredible was revealed that could change everything. Those who awakened in the game gained powerful spiritual strength and talents in reality, like a bridge between two worlds. But the strangest thing happened during the beta test. Jiang Liu accidentally ended up in a chat where the interlocutors were not people, but monsters from the game. Cold, calculating voices from another world. By spying on their correspondence, he fished out a bunch of secrets, as if picking keys to locked doors. At first, Jiang Liu hesitated, torn between fear and hope, but then he decided to check out one lead. And he found the secret treasure of the deity under an old tree, hidden in the shadow of centuries. The black iron-ranked amethyst sword lay in his hands, cold and heavy, like a promise of power. And then he learned a unique skill, Eye of Insight, to see vulnerable spots and strike to the death, leaving the enemy no chance. Zhang Liu realized that with this knowledge, he would accelerate to the limit and break free from the shackles of weakness and illness. The monsters immediately realized that the deity had disappeared, and the air filled with whispers of anger and anxiety. But Zhang Liu rushed forward without looking back because he needed to become stronger and survive at any cost. After all, this is the only way he can pull his family out of poverty and break the chains of hopelessness that have shackled them for years. His family desperately wanted to earn money for his treatment. His mother was going crazy from her own helplessness, and this pain burned more than any fire. He had to break out of this damned hole, break through the wall that separated him from the future. I injected the last ampule. It would last for 3 days, and these days were supposed to be decisive. The new start point became his only chance, the last thread connecting him with hope. The first thing he did was rush into the monster chat, greedily absorbing every word as if dying of thirst. There were whispers of future beings of the Emperor's level and of a higher order. In their hands would be an endless legacy and resources capable of revolutionizing the world. This news burned Zhang Liu, igniting a flame of determination within him that could no longer be extinguished. He put his gaming helmet back on and burst into the game world, ready to face any challenge head-on. He had to abruptly log off the network. He had just picked up trophies from a rare monster, and this moment was too valuable to waste. Without wasting a second, Zhang Liu checked the loot, greedily examining each item. Armor, cloak, and ring, the elite always gave away their best gear, as if acknowledging the winner's strength. Immediately, the voice of the system assistant was heard, soft but distinct, like an echo from another dimension. She congratulated Jiang Liu on his title of Pioneer and demanded that he confirm the award, cementing his new status. Now he had unlocked the passive skill, Triple Ring, a guaranteed critical hit on the third try, as if fate itself was helping him win. Too bright, too noticeable. Jiang Liu immediately asked to hide his name, title, and level, not wanting to become a target for someone else's ambitions. If the first kill of an elite rewarded such a set, it was scary to imagine what would drop from a real boss, hiding his secrets in the depths of the world. But the assistant calmly explained, the trophies of special monsters depend on their class, and in the early stages, until players reach level 20, items of the black iron rank are the pinnacle, and the chance of silver is negligible, almost ghostly. Equipment ranks ranged from ordinary to diamond, a strict hierarchy of power, a ladder that had to be climbed step by step. Now, Zhang Liu had everything laid out in its entirety, seeing the whole picture, and this knowledge gave him confidence. And then the witnesses of that battle recognized him, and in their eyes, one could see curiosity mixed with envy. They even promised him a place in the Invincible Guild, but first they wanted to take a closer look at his clothes, as if assessing the goods. Zhang Liu waved it off. He was in a hurry because time was his most valuable resource. But the guild members were not far behind. Their boss had done him the honor of wanting to evaluate the equipment. There was no point in showing ingratitude, and there was a threat hidden in those words. Jinleo suddenly realized that they weren't going to accept him. They were going to kill him and rob him because he hadn't let them look at his things. And this realization sent a chill through him. They just burst out laughing, and there wasn't a drop of kindness in that laughter. If the Invincible Guild wanted something, they would get it, sweeping away everything in their path. One of them decided to teach a lesson, his voice sounding like the crack of a whip. If you have power, you do what you want. If you don't have power, you tuck your tail between your legs and don't show up. Grabbing the enormous sword, Invincible Tree, he roared that Zhonglu was just unlucky, and his words were filled with cruel confidence. And with all his might, he struck the ground with his sword, striking sparks and leaving a deep crack, as if a sign of his power. Zhang Liu threw a question at the system as he ran, his voice abrupt. "What is the pain level in the game?" The answer came instantly, cold and precise. Pain is 5% of reality. There was no time to relax. The attack of a poisonous spider had just triggered an attack of myasthenia, and even in the game, Zhonglu had to avoid damage at all costs, because the pain here was only a shadow of the real thing. Another player shouted at Tree not to damage his equipment, and they rushed towards Zhang Liu like a pack of predators sensing weakness. At that very moment, he soared into a high jump, breaking the distance, and hung in the air for a second, as if defying gravity. The Eye of Insight and the Triple Ring were already working, intertwining into a single deadly system. Now, the Invincible had to take care of themselves. One hit, and Jiang Liu dealt double and triple damage, and the numbers flashed like fireworks. The enemy was blown away with one blow, like a piece of fluff carried away by a gust of wind. Now it was Tree's turn, and his eyes showed a mixture of anger and distrust. Invincible under the heavens couldn't comprehend how this was even possible, and reality seemed to be cracking at the seams. And where did someone get so much damage and speed at the initial stage? It contradicted all the laws of the game. Zhang Liu flashed like lightning, leaving behind only blurred outlines, elusive and swift, and his sword strikes destroyed all the enemy's chances of salvation, turning invincibility into an empty phrase. Having hit an enemy, Zhang Liu immediately began churning out double and critical damage, the numbers flashing in the air like fiery signs of fate. But he did not give up and rushed into a counterattack. Like a storm breaking from the mountain peaks, Wang Liu noted to himself. The enemy's defense was surprisingly steely, as if forged in the forges of the gods themselves. And he rushed forward with fury, like a whirlwind bringing death with it. They whirled in a mad whirlwind of battle. Steel sang, the air heated with tension. Zhang Liu activated the Eye of Insight and the triple strike combo again, and the world froze for a moment, obeying his will. Tree yelled at the boss to be careful. This kid had some really weird skills, like the game itself was adjusting to him. Now it's time for a showdown with the Invincible Under the Sky, a battle that will be whispered about in the dark corners of gaming halls. Then an ally jumped out in front of him, trying to negotiate with Zhang Liu, and there was a pleading look in his eyes. But it turned out that Invincible Under the Sky had used his ally as a human shield, and he was knocked out with one blow, as if a candle had been extinguished. Zhang Liu slid behind the Invincible's boss in one swift movement, and he didn't even have time to swing, frozen in an awkward, doomed pose. Invincible Under the Heavens longed to cut his enemy into pieces, and all his pride burned in this desire. But every blow from Zhang Liu dealt him double damage, as if the world itself was siding with the lone wolf. There was one step left until the critical hit on Invincible Under Heaven, an instant that could rewrite history. But he was right about one thing, and this truth rang in the air like a taut string. When a man has enough power, he can truly do whatever he wants. This truth was as ancient as the stars themselves. Invincible Under the Sky screamed at the top of his lungs that he would remember the big dream and that the day would come when he would make him writhe in his death throes. His cry was a mixture of rage and helpless despair. All Zhang Liu had to do was collect the dropped equipment, and the metal felt cold on his fingers, promising new strength. There was a tiger-skin dagger, a suit of knightly armor, and boots of agility, like fragments of legend scattered across the battlefield. The agility boots came in handy. It was time to return to the newcomer's village to replenish supplies and catch my breath. Walking down the main street, of the newcomer village, Zhang Liu noticed that many new NPCs had appeared. Perhaps those big shots that were whispered about in the chat, like the shadows of great secrets, were indeed hiding among them. He figured that killing an NPC with one hit in a newbie village was too suspicious, and a shadow of caution fell on his thoughts. Suddenly, a girl flashed nearby. Her silhouette was fragile, almost weightless. She pestered the merchant with the question of whether his goods were tasty, and her voice rang with a childish, defenseless hope. The dessert she was interested in, he had made himself using honey and wheat flour picked in the misty mountains. It was delicious, of course, and the aroma drifted across the street, enticing and teasing. The girl couldn't resist the aroma of the delicacy. Her eyes lit up like two little suns. But the merchant began to drive her away, grumbling that she was ruining his appetite, and his words were tinged with a tired, familiar rudeness. Seeing this hackneyed scene, Jiang Liu began to suspect. What if this is one of those big shots from the chat, hiding behind a mask of vulnerability? The girl burst into tears. She had not eaten for 3 days, and these tears were heavier than any weapon. Looking at her, Zhang Liu remembered his sister. She once cried like this, desperately wanting a piece of cake, and this memory burned her heart. Then he had to convince her that this thing was terribly tasteless and drag the baby home, hiding his own pain behind a joke. The plot was banally simple, but it squeezed my heart like someone's cold hand. Zhang Liu stepped decisively towards the merchant, and his shadow fell on the counter, long and hard. He asked the price of the dessert, and his voice sounded even without trembling. The salesman glanced at Zhang Liu and realized he wanted to play the hero, so he decided to give him a chance, squinting like a predator sensing its prey. The merchant grinned maliciously and said, "Exactly 1 gold, 40 silver, and 99 copper coins." The words fell like stones, measuring out the price of the decision. This was literally all that Zhang Liu had, down to the last penny. It seemed like this NPC could see the contents of someone else's wallet, and the thought made him feel uneasy. In the game, 1 copper coin was worth roughly 1 star coin in the real world. To buy meat for a family, you only needed 30 star coins, and a red potion in the game was worth only 20 copper coins, and this arithmetic burned inside. Zhang Liu earned this money through sweat and blood, and every coin held an echo of pain. The girl came quietly and tugged at his cloak, her fingers cold as morning frost. She stood with her head bowed, and there were more words in that submission than in any vows. And she began to beg Jiang Liu to buy this cake. She was so hungry that even her pride crumbled to dust. And he finally decided to buy it. If activating the quest cost that much, it meant the girl really could be an important person. He went all in, and fate hung on the knife's edge. The merchant waved his hand and thanked him for his purchase, and there was something more than simple politeness in the gesture. A second later, the plate with the cake was in Zhang Liu's hands, and a warm aroma enveloped him, momentarily blurring the boundaries between the game and reality. Suddenly, a laugh was heard behind me, light, ringing, as if crystal beads were scattering. The girl said that, as expected of the player who drew first blood, his courage was truly on another level. And there was a strange, almost ancient wisdom in those words. And with these words, she disappeared, leaving behind only a purple glow melting like the dawn mist. She turned into Lunaria, her name hanging in the air like a seal. Players who had been here before either began making excuses upon hearing the price or tried to cheat by hiding a single copper coin to complete the quest. Some even spoke to her in a downright vulgar tone, and they all vanished without a trace. Now, Jiang Liu understood that she was the one who killed those 3 players, but he still couldn't believe that NPCs were capable of going that far, and the thought sent a chill down his spine. Lunaria lifted his chin sharply with her finger, and there was neither roughness nor tenderness in this movement, only cold necessity. She liked his kind nature, a rarity that was valued even in this cruel world. At this point, their conversation ended, and the silence became heavier than any words. As a parting shot, Lunaria said that Jiang Liu's fate was just right, and tossed her test to him like a key to a secret door. And then she disappeared into the air, leaving behind only a slight scent of thunder. Passers-by stood gaping. How had Jiang Liu managed to activate the quest chain when no one had ever managed it before? Their gazes were filled with envy, fear, and admiration. He had been given a unique task by Lunaria to collect the gallbladders of 100 small sand turtles, and the task seemed almost impossible. But first, he rushed to check his wallet, and the hope in his chest tightened into a tight knot. It turned out to be completely empty, as if luck itself had turned its back for a moment. There was no way out. They had to sell the trophies from the poisonous spider and the junk that had fallen from the three of them from the Invincibles. Otherwise, they wouldn't even scrape together enough for supplies, and this calculation was cold and merciless. Zhang Liu dumped the items on the market in the newcomer village, and the items flashed like beacons in the darkness. The things immediately attracted glances, greedy, appraising, predatory. One player offered 10 silver coins for all the goods, and the offer hung in the air like bait. He was immediately interrupted by another who raised the price to 1 gold coin, and the bargaining flared up like dry grass. It was a level 6 player, the head of the Immortals Corporation. Just think, the Immortals had also dropped by New Origin Point, and they were a legendary guild from that very top MMO. Behind every top guild stood serious sponsors, and their shadow hung over the world like a thundercloud. The head of the Immortals suggested taking the conversation away from prying ears, and his voice rang with the steel of command. Zhang Liu nodded eagerly, his silence speaking louder than words. The Immortal couldn't hide his surprise. A solo player had obtained such equipment all by himself? The question hung between them, heavy and poignant. Zhang Liu remained silent, slowly sipping his tea, and in that silence there was a whole story hidden. The Immortal didn't pry, simply handing him a gold coin as if to say, "Consider it a gesture of goodwill." He figured that if things worked out, they could team up later, and there was a subtle, calculating hope hidden in those words. The situation seemed strangely generous, and that made it even more alarming. The Immortal suddenly asked him if he had heard of hidden class tokens, and the question sounded like a gong. Upon reaching level 10, players took a standard specialization: warrior, mage, priest, archer, or assassin, 5 classes in total, like 5 roads leading to nowhere. But New Origin Point offered real freedom. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of hidden classes, a labyrinth of possibilities waiting to be explored. The Immortal was hinting that if Zhang Liu were to stumble upon a hidden class job change token, he would be willing to pay a hefty price for it, and his gaze was filled with greed mixed with respect. And Zhang Liu raised an eyebrow. What made him think he was even capable of obtaining such a token? And there was a quiet confidence in the gesture. The server has been open for less than 3 days, and Zhang Liu is already showing off black iron and silver grade items. If he's putting the best common items up for sale, that means he has his own working methods, and this insight flashed like lightning. It dawned on Zhang Liu that the Immortal wanted to find out about these plans, and a cold calculation slid across his mind like a blade. But he suddenly chuckled and waved it off. He wasn't going to pry anything out, and his laughter was sincere, almost warm. The guy simply reminded him of a loner from a past life, and in those words, there was hidden an old, scarred pain. In one old MMO, a top guild of 10,000 players made an enemy of a solo player and was wiped out by him, and the story rang out like a legend. The Immortal still remembered his daring nickname, Bloodthirsty Madblade, a name that had become both a curse and a hymn. He knew that top solo players had their own methods and their own reasons for keeping to themselves, but he needed to push himself and protect his organization, which meant becoming stronger. So he wanted to work with Zhang Liu, and there was more honor in that confession than in 1,000 oaths. Zhang Liu's instinct told him he could extract maximum benefit from the Immortal. Collaboration with the Immortal Corporation could have been a trump card, but right now, the Demoness's quest was paramount, and duty called him forward. Supplies replenished, Zhang Liu was back in action, his determination taut like a bowstring. A memory clicked. A sand turtle was whining in chat about boulders on the coast. She wrote that many of her fellow turtles were stuck and couldn't move, and this random phrase suddenly became the key. Suddenly, alien figures flashed ahead, and the shadows on the sand seemed like ominous omens. The other players realized he had just left the village and started asking him questions. What level was he? Why was his name hidden? They decided he was a noob, and their voices were filled with mockery. They realized he was also aiming for the sand turtles, and they were just missing a tank to withstand the damage. So the invincible double trio invited him along, and the invitation was both needy and threatening. But Zhang Lao cut him off. He was used to playing alone, and his loneliness was not a weakness, but armor. The invincible pair of threes snorted. The turtles have 10 defense units, and even the amethyst sword, which is currently at the top, only has 10 to 15 attack units. There's no point in jumping over your head without a proper weapon, and there was a bitter but honest truth in these words. She offered, if he went with them, they would even lend him a gun, and there was a hint of kindness in this gesture. But he didn't listen to the end and was already walking away. The invincible plane snapped after them. There's no point in groveling in front of him. He obviously wants to play solo and grab all the awards for himself. He shouted at them not to come crawling back to them with pleas when he regrets his decision. And these words flew like sharp stones. Those invincibles again, and Zhang Liu had already stolen the gear from two of them, so now he had to keep his ears open, and caution became his second skin. He burst onto the west coast, and it was already swarming with people, and the air hummed with tension like a taut wire. The sand turtles boasted thick armor and mountains of health. They couldn't be brought down so easily, and they seemed like living fortresses. Zhang Liu slowed down, scanning the area. Where was that gigantic stone they were all talking about in the chat? His gaze was sharp as a blade. And suddenly, a whole stone forest grew up ahead, and the rocks stretched towards the sky like frozen waves. Flying closer, he instantly put everything together, and the mosaic of facts fell into place. There really were turtles swarming there, and their shells glittered like dark mirrors. And every single one of them got stuck in the underwater rocks, and this trap became their curse. Zhang Liu grabbed the sword and rushed forward, the steel singing in anticipation of battle. One sand turtle collapsed, and the ground shook from the impact. The Invincibles spent 20 minutes finishing her off, and each blow was heavy and clumsy. As they were shouting triumphantly, one of them noticed a strange movement in the forest, and joy froze on their faces. As they crept up, they were dumbfounded. There, alone, was the same solo player crushing the enemy, and his speed seemed unnatural. His pace was unbelievable. He moved like the elements themselves. He dealt monstrous damage to the turtle single-handedly, and each blow echoed in the air with a heavy, booming sound, as if the earth itself were shaking from the fury of the blade. Their amazement grew. He was hitting a turtle almost every minute, and the damage numbers were flashing like fire signs, defying the very logic of the game. But soon it dawned on them. The turtles were not moving, and the silence around them became ominous, like a frozen curse. They finally saw it. The shells were wedged between the rocks, unable to move forward, and this immobility turned the formidable monsters into helpless targets. The invincible pair of triplets hissed, "We must attack him. The place is an ideal farm," and in their whisper there was a greed, sharp as a blade. But four might not be enough, and if there was a ruckus and other players came running, there would be no end to the problems, and this thought sent a chill down their spines. So they rushed to call the boss of the Invincibles, and their steps sounded hurried, almost panicked. They hoped that they would definitely be generously rewarded for such a tip, and this hope burned within them brighter than any torch. Zhang Liu began to lose the items he needed for that cunning devil girl's quest. The chance was slim, only 1 in 4 kills, and every success felt like a miracle snatched from fate. But the turtles dropped equipment and silver, so he didn't end up losing out, and the metal felt pleasantly cool on his fingers, promising new opportunities. Even though he'd already reached level 6, fighting level 5 monsters was still hellishly difficult. It felt like the levels of players and mobs in this game were completely unbalanced, and the very reality of the game was warped under the weight of this imbalance. Without this landscape bug, the turtles would have become a real wall, as impregnable as ancient fortresses. Here another turtle was stuck in a rock trap, its helplessness looking almost tragic. Now it became much easier to kill them, and this ease contained its own bitter irony. Zhang Liu swung his sword again, sharply, without a backswing, and the steel cut through the air with a predatory whistle. But the turtle did not collapse. Instead, it bared its sharp teeth, and in that grin, an ancient, wild rage flashed. It suddenly turned out to be a rare monster, and its silhouette seemed to thicken the shadow around itself, making the world a little darker. It immediately surfaced from the chat. These were the subordinate turtles who'd been sent to deal with the rubble, and the message flickered like an alarm signal. It was the perfect moment. If a solo player wanted to get ahead, they had to secure the first kills of special monsters at any cost. and this chance was shining before their eyes like a beacon in a storm. The Invincibles froze, watching in admiration. They didn't believe that this guy was seriously going to take down a rare monster single-handedly, and their gazes were a mixture of amazement and envy. But the next second, Zhang Liu was already flying to attack, and his movement was as swift as a lightning strike. This time, the damage was weaker, not the same caliber, and this annoyance scratched from within like a sharp splinter. Luckily, the monster turned out to be slow as a rock. You could use its speed to kite it, and this slowness became its curse. And with his current agility, he could unleash a 4-hit combo in a row. And this thought rang in his head like a battle cry. The chances of bringing him down were quite real, and hope spread its wings, rustling barely audibly. The Invincibles sat in shock at his technique. Even the legendary solo pro, Bloodthirsty Mad Blade, played at roughly the same level, and this comparison sounded like the highest praise. As expected from a rare monster, there was a lot of fuss, so much fuss, and this giant still had 30% of health left, and this percentage seemed like an insurmountable wall. Suddenly, Zhang Liao felt a sharp movement behind him. A chill of danger ran down his spine like an icy needle. A horde of Invincibles rushed towards him, aiming to take the first kill of a rare monster and wipe Zhang Liu off the map at the same time. And their fury was palpable, thick as fog. They attacked at once, their blades whistling through the air, and this whistle cut the ear like the cry of a bird of prey. The Invincible's boss barked, "Throw 100 people to wear down a rare mob, and leave the last hit to him. The first kill must be his," and his voice thundered with metal and power. Once again, fate brought them face to face with the big dream. He had once attacked from behind when Zhang Liu was relaxed and brazenly tore his clothes off, and today he had brought his own people to settle the score, and this old grudge had flared up with renewed vigor. Zhang Liu's heart sank. It had only been a short time, but their levels had already surpassed his, and this gap felt like an abyss opening up beneath his feet. This was the power of corporate support. He immediately realized it wouldn't be easy, and that truth weighed heavily on his shoulders. Another group of Invincibles froze in the bushes. They weren't even level 6 yet. Going there for glasses would be pure suicide, and fear bound them tighter than any chains. It was better to sit in the shadows for now and snatch a kill when someone's health bar was almost gone, and this cowardly tactic seemed reasonable to them. The boss barged into Zhang Liu, demanding the return of his gear, his voice booming like thunder. But he had already knocked him down once and was ready to do it again, and steel rang in that determination. Jiang Liu was already raising his blade, aiming at his back, and the blade reflected a cold light, promising retribution. But suddenly, the big tree grew between them, and its figure blocked the horizon, heavy and indestructible. He was wearing protective gear that glittered, and the metal shimmered like the scales of an ancient dragon. Now the boss was eager to try out his axe, and his eyes were blazing with the lust for battle. And he landed a critical blow on Zhang Liu, and the world darkened for a moment, shrinking into a single blinding point of pain. He fell to the ground as if he had been mown down, and dust rose up around him like a farewell shroud. There was a sharp pressure in my chest, perhaps from the blow, or perhaps it was the onset of a myasthenia attack, and this internal storm was more terrible than any external one. The Invincibles were already rushing towards him, confident that he would surrender without a fight, and their steps thundered like a sentence. Then a second blow struck his back, and the pain flared, blinding him. It was a pitiful sight for them. They ordered him to take off all the clothes he was wearing, and these words were filled with contempt, cold and merciless. And then they told him to announce in the world chat that he had earned the title of Pioneer only by sneaking around and attacking the boss of Invincible under heaven. If he did that, so be it, they would let him go. And this humiliating deal hung in the air like a noose. Otherwise, they would order their people to block his respawn point and hunt him again and again until he dropped to level 0, and that threat was more real than any monster. Zhang Liu couldn't even breathe. It seemed like the attack of myasthenia was already taking its toll, and the darkness was approaching, narrowing the world to a narrow slit. And Invincible under the heavens kept laughing, telling him to think carefully, and his laughter rang like shards of glass. But suddenly he caught a noise behind him, and the sound cut through the chaos like a sharp blade. It turned out that a rare monster had mutated and become monstrously strong, and its silhouette was distorted, as if reality itself was cracking at the seams. They couldn't take him down. They probably fed him too much experience, and now this mistake turned into a nightmare. The mutated sand turtle smashed everything around it, spinning up its sandstorm skill, and the sand whirlwind roared like an enraged beast. Invincible under heaven, calculated, the monster had only 14 units of health left. If they all attacked, they could finish it off, and this cold arithmetic of war rang in his head. If they took down a rare mob, everyone would receive a dark iron item, and this reward beckoned like a golden mirage. The whole group rushed to the attack, and their roar merged with the roar of the storm. Everyone craved dark iron gear, and greed burned in their eyes, brighter than any flame. But then they noticed the big dream had disappeared somewhere, and this emptiness seemed ominous. And he was already rushing towards the monster, and his shadow slid across the ground, swift and elusive. If he quit the game right now, all his efforts would be in vain. He needed to hold on just a little longer, and this thought became an anchor holding him back from the brink of the abyss. But the boss wasn't going to give up the kill of a rare mob, and his will was stronger than any stone. Neither of them was going to give an inch, and the air thickened with tension, becoming almost tangible. The invincible one couldn't stand anyone challenging him and his guild, and that pride burned within him. The axe rose again and fell down, and the steel sang its eternal song of destruction. But Zhang Liu had no intention of giving up. A fierce battle broke out between them, and sparks flew like stars born in the flames of battle. But it was not destined to last, and fate was already preparing a new blow. They were torn apart by the rush of a huge monster, and this rush shook the earth like an earthquake. Invincible under the heavens landed right under his paw, and the boss's cry was drowned out by the roar of the storm. In those moments, Zhang Liu managed to activate the Eye of Insight and the triple strike combo, and time seemed to slow down, obeying his will. And he unleashed a flurry of attacks on the monster, and each blow rang like a bell, counting down the moments of triumph. He alone had hammered almost 20 points of damage into him, and the others only now realized what a shameful 1 point of forced damage they had been knocking out all this time, and this realization burned like a brand. A system announcement echoed across the world. Congratulations to player Big Dream on your first kill of the rare monster, the small sand turtle. Jiang Yu's level skyrocketed, and as a reward, a gold-ranked vigor pill and a fallen dagger dropped, sparkling like symbols of a new era. Now he was ready for a total cleanup. The hunt was just beginning, and there was a cold determination in his gaze. This onslaught scared the Invincibles to the point of trembling. They screamed at him to stay away from them, and their cries rang with primal fear. He crushed everyone in a row without distinguishing faces, and his blade knew no mercy. The weakest only shook with terror, silently pressing themselves into the ground, and their fear was thick, almost tangible. They wanted to slip away quietly, but they didn't have time, and fate closed all the doors in front of them. Panicked, they did not want to die at his hands, and this horror bound them tighter than any shackles. Therefore, they activated self-destruction, and their figures dissolved into the flickering light like fading stars. Zhang Liu longed for only one thing, to sell his clothes, log out of the system, and collapse without strength, and this simple dream now seemed like the greatest luxury. He posted a listing of beginner gear in the chat, and the buyer responded instantly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment forever. But suddenly, a giant shadow loomed over him, and it blocked out the sky, making the world small and fragile. A new elite monster had spawned, and its presence distorted space like heavy gravity. The giant reptile appeared at the perfect time, and this coincidence seemed to have a cruel irony of fate. Judging by the familiar tingling sensation, an attack of muscle weakness would hit in a couple of minutes. He needed to finish this quickly, and this race against time was squeezing his heart into an icy fist. He had no medicine left for this month, and this emptiness in the medicine cabinet was more terrible than any enemy. Without painkillers, each round of illness became torture, and at home, hungry brothers and sisters were waiting for me. There wasn't enough money for food or treatment, and this burden pressed on my shoulders like a lead cloak. These thoughts clenched my will into a steel fist, and a fire flared up inside that even the most severe cold could not extinguish. And he rushed into the attack, and his dash was full of desperate determination. For so many years, he had felt powerless, and this helplessness burned like an unhealing wound. And he was unable to fulfill the duty of the eldest son, and this guilt lay on his heart like a heavy stone. The blade slammed into the scales again and again, dealing critical damage, each blow like an oath spoken in silence. A memory flashed before his eyes. He was holding his little sister in his arms in the slums, and the image was brighter than any light. The two of them looked out at the new, wealthy district that shone, and the light beckoned like a distant star. My sister then whispered that one day she would become rich, and her voice rang with a childish, pure faith. And he swore that he would do everything in his power to make her dream come true, and this vow became his guiding star. At last he found a task that even this exhausted body could handle, and in this occupation there was a bitter hope. And he received a real chance to turn the family's fate around, and this opportunity shone like a rare artifact. There was no way he was going to miss this chance, and that determination rang like a taut string. Moreover, he forged every grain of strength here with his own sweat and blood, and this price made victory especially dear. The server erupted with congratulations. Player Big Dream has killed an elite lesser sand turtle for the first time. Glory to the hero. And envy swept across the entire server in a thick, heavy wave. The loot flashed before my eyes, shimmering with all the shades of precious metals. But Jiang Liu didn't have time to grab him, and that moment slipped away like sand through his fingers. The system threw him out of the game harshly, and reality collapsed like a wall of ice. The system's cold voice declared, "You are in an unsafe zone. To avoid a death penalty, your character will remain where they are." And these words sounded like a death sentence with no right to appeal. But in the real room, everything collapsed in an instant. Zhang Liu's helmet flew off his head with a loud crash and hit the floor, and the sound echoed in his chest like a blow to the heart. He was shaking violently. A new attack was rolling in like a storm, ready to swallow everything in its path. Doctors gave the body 6 months at most, and this figure hung over it like the sword of Damocles. At that moment, Mom burst into the apartment and immediately broke into a smile. "We're having mutant meat for dinner today." But the son was not in the room, and silence hung in the air, heavy and ringing, like the echo of unfulfilled expectations. Today, Jiang Liu felt unexpectedly more cheerful, as if fate itself had momentarily lifted the leaden weight from his shoulders, and he firmly decided to help his family, putting all his exhausted but unbroken willpower into this decision. Father finally received his salary, and the family specially bought Jiang Liu's favorite meat to please him. All their quiet, stubborn love was hidden in this simple gesture. But he immediately pushed the plate away, and the movement was sharp, almost desperate. It would be better if his brother ate his fill, because every piece was worth its weight in gold. Xiao Yu was now a second level awakened, and the mutant meat accelerated his development, and this tiny bit of advantage could one day become decisive. Zhang Liu's father supported his decision and sternly told Xiao, "If your brother gives you his meat, take it. Every level is worth its weight in gold for him now." These words rang with a stern but fair wisdom. Xiao Yu clenched his fists, his knuckles white with tension. He would work until he was exhausted to catch up with his brother, and then the family would be able to move to a new area, escaping the clutches of poverty. Everyone believed in him. Every hope rested on his shoulders, and this load was heavier than any armor. The age of the Star Ocean transformed animals and plants into ferocious beasts. They descended upon cities like avalanches, wiping entire neighborhoods off the face of the earth. Human living space melted like ice under the scorching sun, and order under the Federation's control crumbled to dust like fragile porcelain. But amidst the chaos, a spark ignited. A small number of people suddenly gained incredible physical strength. They were called the Awakened, and in this name, one could hear an echo of an ancient legend. Strength was divided into levels, from 1 to 10. Those who advanced beyond the third possessed perfect combat techniques, and their movements became almost inhumanly graceful. And some people developed special abilities. They became almost invincible, and a cold, unearthly light lit up their eyes. The Federation seized on them like a lifeline. The Awakened could restore order, and that hope burned brighter than any lamp in the corridors of power. Awakened of the third level and above began to be gathered in special administrative zones, in the new districts, and these places became islands of calm in the midst of a raging ocean of chaos. Unlike the old districts, dilapidated, chaotic, and lawless, the new districts became a bastion of civilization, protected by the shield of the elite, and their walls seemed impregnable. The best medicine, advanced technology, luxurious living, they turned into a real paradise that everyone dreamed of, and this paradise beckoned like a distant, unattainable light. Raising an awakened one is the only ticket to this paradise for the slum dwellers, and this goal has become the meaning of existence for many. By Federation law, if a family acquired even one-third level awakened, the entire family was eligible to move, and that prospect shone like a beacon on a stormy night. But raising an awaken to the third level cost a colossal amount of money. Without resources, it was impossible, and this gap seemed insurmountable. While Zhang Liu still had time left, he had to make the most of the game, and this thought burned inside him like an unquenchable fire. Even if he could not find a way to save his life, he must leave his family a livelihood, and this oath rang in his soul like a taut string. He burst into the world of New Origin again, his heart aching with frustration. Due to his abrupt exit, the dropped gear had probably already been picked up by someone else, and this loss felt like a stab in the back. But when he returned, he froze, and time seemed to stand still. All the trophies were in place, and next to him stood a ninth-level immortal, and his figure seemed carved from stone. He didn't let anyone touch them, and that one movement spoke louder than any words. No one dared to contact him, and a tense, almost tangible silence hung around. It was Brother Immortal, and the name itself sounded like both a sentence and a blessing. All this time, he was racking his brains over why Jiang Liu had hidden his name and level, and this mystery was bothering him like a splinter under his skin. He never expected that Jiang Liu was the very same big dream who was taking all the rare kills. Although leaving the game at such a point was pure madness, and there was a wild beauty in that audacity. Zhang Liu exhaled and thanked him, briefly explaining that in reality, something unexpected had suddenly happened, and a whole universe of pain was hidden in those simple words. He added that the gear had fallen from members of the Vertical Alliance who were trying to squeeze him out and asked if he wanted to buy it, and the question sounded like a thrown-down gauntlet. The immortal looked at him with undisguised amazement. He could not believe that he had taken out everyone single-handedly, and he could not even imagine where the limit of his strength was, and this incomprehension flickered in his gaze like a distant star. He immediately decided to take everything. Their immortal technicians were just developing, and this set for beginners was vital for them to strengthen, and this need was evident in his every move. The entire set was worth at least 5 gold coins, but the corporation didn't have that much cash right now, and that frustration was clawing at him from the inside. Then he offered to transfer 50,000 star coins to the account, and the figure hung in the air like a sparkling mirage. It was a huge sum. Zhang Liu's parents didn't earn that much in a year, and the thought took his breath away for a moment. With this money, he could buy himself medicine, and Cao Yu and Yan could eat mutant meat every day, and this simple luxury seemed almost a miracle. The immortal raked in all the spoils and immediately offered Jiang Liu the chance to join the immortal technicians, a gesture that was a mixture of calculation and genuine respect. There, a social package and compensation awaited him, and these words sounded like a promise of a safe haven. Knowing the immortal's character, Jiang Liu had no doubt that the reward would be substantial, and this confidence gave him strength. He sincerely thanked her for the offer, but the habit of playing solo had become too deeply ingrained, and this independence had become part of his soul. Joining the clan meant committing himself to the team and missing out on a ton of opportunities. Besides, he couldn't promise to hold on to leadership forever, and this uncertainty weighed on him. It was much more comfortable for a loner, and this freedom had its own bitter charm. The immortal had been expecting such an answer in advance, but the corporation's management had strictly ordered him to ask, and this formality hung between them like a thin thread. Finally, he asked me to be sure to call him if there was anything for sale again, and this request showed not only business acumen, but something more. Zhang Liu didn't even have a second to look at the rewards from the rare and elite mobs, and this rush squeezed time into a tight knot. There lay a tempering potion and a gold-ranked fallen dagger, the metal gleaming dully, promising new possibilities. Plus, an elite silver-rank necklace and dark iron armor. Each item was like a fragment of a legend. And also, elite bracers and boots made of dark iron. And in their weight, one could feel the ancient power. Zhang Liu hit the jackpot again, and luck smiled upon him in a blinding flash. It was a powerful upgrade. He assembled an elite set, and the set bonus immediately activated, and energy rolled through his body like an electric shock. For the necklace, he received the skill Jump, a mini teleport over a short distance, and the very thought of this ability made his heart beat faster. He immediately asked the system assistant if he looked too flashy and demanded that the equipment's appearance be concealed, and this caution was dictated not by cowardice but by cold calculation. Now he was wearing the usual clothes of a newbie, and this disguise seemed almost like a mockery of fate. But Zhang Liu couldn't make out the stats on the golden cannon, as if they required some kind of password, and this secret beckoned him like forbidden fruit. He couldn't unlock it or recognize it, and this helplessness was clawing at him from the inside. The dagger of the fallen stubbornly refused to open, and its silence was almost insulting. Then he simply threw it forward, sharply, without thinking, and the movement was almost desperate. And it worked, and the world stood still for a moment, listening to this gesture. The dagger obediently returned straight to the palm, and the steel quietly clinked as if greeting its owner. The weapon turned out to have a twist, and this peculiarity contained its own cunning charm. Suddenly, Lunaria appeared out of nowhere and snatched up the dagger, muttering that its stats were average, but the bonus skill was interesting, and her voice sounded like the dry crack of a whip. Zhang Liu screamed for the blade back, his voice a mixture of rage and despair. The demoness categorically did not like this tone, and her gaze grew cold, becoming sharp as a blade. Lunaria already knew that he had killed the mutated mob and the snail, but she still asked how things were going with her task, and there was a subtle curiosity in her question. Zhang Liu hastily confirmed that everything was done and stated that he had the quest items with him, and each word was difficult for him to say. Thank the gods, the rare mob's tornado swept through the neighboring turtles, and gall bladders poured out in abundance, and this luck seemed almost miraculous. Zhang Liu's level jumped again, and the numbers flashed like holiday lights. Lunaria handed back the dagger, finally recognizing it, and there was something almost condescending in the gesture. It gave a 10% chance of dealing 10 times the damage, and that number rang out like a battle cry. She explained that the final stats of unidentified equipment depended largely on the skill of the appraiser. He was lucky that she had taken on the job, and there was no pride in these words, but a simple statement of fact. Now he had to go to the Batcave, and the very thought of that place made his blood run cold. Collecting the vampire bat fangs and passing the second trial seemed like an almost impossible task. Lunaria took the appraisal fee for herself in cold blood, and her movement was as swift as a snake's strike. Zhang Liu certainly didn't expect this, and this sudden loss stung him like nettles. The wallet was empty again, and the emptiness was felt almost physically. This devil raked in every last coin, and there was no malice or pity in her actions, only cold calculation. There was only hope that the beast had a more substantial reward in store for him, and this spark of hope kept his spirits up. He remembered that some mouse was writing something in the wild monsters chat, and this random thought flared up like a bright spark. He resolutely began to search for her messages, his fingers flying across the interface like the wings of an alarmed bird. And he found exactly what he was looking for. A hidden class token was hidden in the Batcave, and this find sparkled like a precious stone in a pile of trash. Zhang Liu abruptly made a request to the system spirit, give a complete summary of the Batcave, and his voice sounded firm, without a shadow of a doubt. And the spirit immediately clicked its gears, starting to download the data, and this mechanical sound seemed almost ominous. The Batcave is the only entrance to the closed region of the Misty Mountains. It's currently an extremely difficult zone, and every word echoed heavily in his chest. There were persistent rumors that monsters in the cave occasionally dropped tokens of the 5 main classes, and these rumors hung in the air like ghosts. Zhang Liu had already reached level 10 and was ready to change his profession, but he longed not for the standard path, but for a powerful, hidden class, and this dream burned within him brighter than any flame. He immediately blurted out a question about hidden class tokens to the spirit, but the spirit only threw up its digital hands. It couldn't help in any way, and this helplessness hung between them like a heavy silence. It was predictable. Even in chat groups, they were kept silent about them, and this veil of secrecy only fueled his excitement. It seemed Jing Lo would have to enter this meat grinder at his own risk. But even the slightest chance of gaining a hidden class was worth the gamble, and this determination steeled his soul. At the entrance to the cave, a crowd of players was already seething, and their voices merged into a single alarming hum. Zhang Lao glanced at the cluster and was shocked. Almost everyone there was level 10, and this concentration of power inspired involuntary respect. Suddenly, an exhausted group emerged from the darkness. 10 of them couldn't bring down a single mouse, but they had collectively dropped down the levels, and their tired faces spoke louder than any words. At that moment, someone's hand fell heavily on Zhang Liu's shoulder, and the touch was firm, almost imperious. One of the players insistently offered to join. It was too dangerous inside, and in a group, the chances were better, and there was genuine concern in his words. But Zhang Liu briefly thanked him and shook his head. He was used to relying only on himself, and this habit became his second self. And he stepped into the cave alone, and his shadow dissolved into the darkness, as if it had never been there. There was an icy darkness and a ringing silence inside, and they enveloped him like a cold shroud. It was time to test the new gun, and the anticipation of battle sweetly squeezed the heart. After leveling up, his stats skyrocketed. It should have been enough to clear the second challenge, and this confidence gave him strength. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a swift movement, and it cut through the darkness like lightning. It was a bat, and its silhouette seemed almost ghostly. And she aimed to strike from behind, and in this intention there was an ancient animal cunning. Zhang Liu grinned predatorily. She would be an excellent target to sharpen his blade, and there was no fear or doubt in that grin. He unleashed a barrage of blows on her, each one dealing monstrous damage, and the steel sang its eternal song of battle. The mouse did not give up and lunged back, aiming a sharp claw, and its fury was almost tangible, but her movements seemed slow to him. Like in viscous syrup, he easily dodged her attacks, and this ease intoxicated him. Another blow, hard, precise, and he entered into a rhythm that became his second wind. He jumped up sharply and flew over her back, and for a moment it seemed to him that he was hovering like a bird. And then he rushed into the attack again, and his movements merged into a single, swift whirlwind. The blade pierced the mouse's body again and again, dozens of times in a row, and each blow echoed in Zhang Liu's hand with a ringing vibration, merging into a single, furious rhythm of battle. Suddenly, a system announcement cut through my ears like an icy blade across an exposed nerve. An elite monster stands before you. Prepare for battle. For Zhang Liu, this only fueled his passion. That same wildfire that drove him forward, even when his mind screamed at him about danger. According to the chat, the elites weren't dropping hidden class tokens, and this bitter truth only emphasized that this wasn't about the loot, but about testing one's own limits. So it's not about the loot, but the challenge. That heady feeling when it's not the reward that's at stake, but your own pride. Suddenly, a tiny, almost cute mouse flashed among the flock. Its silhouette emerged for a moment from the chaos of the battle like a mocking ghost of hope. For a second, Zhang Liu froze, and time seemed to stretch into a thin thread. What if this little thing was the key to his goal? The very chance for which he was willing to take any risk. The group that entered next immediately shouted out tactics, their voices merging into an alarming chorus. Stay alert, dodge, hit those with low health or who have strayed from the pack. The 5 of them swore that they would bring down this mouse without any problem, and their confidence was tinged with the usual bravado of those accustomed to relying on the power of numbers. But then their gazes fell on the solitary man, and a tense silence hung in the air. They couldn't tear their eyes away from what they saw. He single-handedly crushed 5 mice at once, and among them was an elite one, its dark wings cutting through the air with a threatening whistle. Zhang Liu barked at them to get out of the way, and the sharp shout didn't sound rude, but rather like a desperate need to maintain concentration. He landed a critical hit with his blade on one of the mice, and the world exploded with a blinding flash of a system announcement. Congratulations to Player Big Dream for the world's first kill of an elite vampire bat. No one had ever seen 1,800 points of damage dealt in a single blow. The figure hung in the air like an impossible defying of common sense. That's how his first tenfold crit worked. In that moment, steel and fate converged at the perfect point, creating a small miracle. But then Zhang Liu noticed the little one was still there, her tiny silhouette, trembling on the edge of visibility as if teasing him. He rushed after her without wasting a second, and his movement was like the pounce of a predator that sensed the decisive moment. The other players stood frozen in awe as they watched his mad dance of blades, their eyes wide with amazement and their mouths hanging open in silent admiration. But the little monster still escaped, soaring upward like a swift shadow, and dissolved into the dark air of the cave, as if it had never existed. Zhonglu barked at them to get out of the way, and his voice rang with an almost desperate plea. Give me just one chance to tail him, to seize this elusive opportunity. At that very moment, a tiny bat darted into the dark opening of one of the side caves, and its movement was so swift that it seemed like an optical illusion. Jiang Liu finally broke free from the crowd, and the cold air of the cave embraced him like an old familiar evil. Now I could calmly look at what the elite monster had dropped, and that very anticipation that makes any player's heart skip a beat stirred in my chest. It turned out to be a class change token. Now he could become an archer, and the very thought of it opened up new horizons for him, even if not the ones he dreamed of. A common token, the hidden class, would have to be found somewhere else, and this annoyance scratched him from within, but could not extinguish the stubborn fire in his chest. Zheng Liu abruptly opened the system window, his fingers flickering over the interface with the familiar dexterity of someone for whom virtual reality has become a second home. He snatched an earpiece from his inventory and immediately dialed the immortal brother, and there was a calculated confidence in his haste. And he offered to lead his group through the Batcave, laying out his proposal directly without unnecessary ceremony. He immediately set the price 30,000 star coins for each one led, but all the tokens minted in the cave remained theirs. His voice carried the usual harshness of a businessman not inclined to generosity. Zhang Liu sternly lowered the bid to 20,000 per person. They could keep the standard 5-class tokens, and there was a cold logic to this compromise. But any hidden class is only his, and in these words there rang an unyielding will that cannot be broken by any money. The immortal brother was also hunting for hidden classes, so he asked that if 2 such tokens were to appear, one would be his, and this request sounded less like a wish than a bitter necessity. Immortal Brothers Group was about to break into the cave, and Zhang Lu could make some good money in the meantime, and this prospect beckoned to him like a distant light in a dark corridor. But the big dream had its share of ill-wishers, and their shadows were already gathering over him, promising new trials. In the real world, in a stuffy office, Boss Peerless was seething with rage over the elite's kill in the Batcave, his face twisted in a grimace of impotent rage. Their corporation had enormous support. They could easily catch up, but this thought did not calm them down. It only added fuel to the fire. But the leadership was demanding a stern accounting for the previous failure when their group had been completely stripped. There was talk that he was about to be demoted, and this threat hung over him like a raised sword. The boss eagerly asked what the bloodthirsty Madblade had said, and his eyes showed a desperate hope of grasping at any straw. He was ready to join the Vertical Alliance and agreed to lead them through the cave yesterday, but he demanded 1,000,000 coins for joining and 50,000 for each person who led them, a figure that sounded like a blatant mockery of someone else's need. He also vowed to rid them of the big dream, and these words rang with a personal vendetta, cold and merciless. It was a matter of personal vendetta. The other man had taken the first kills from him too often, and this series of defeats ate away at his soul like caustic acid. Just at that moment, the world thundered with congratulations to the bloodthirsty Madblade on his first kill of the little white fox boss. The guy certainly had skill, and this fact only increased the annoyance. Boss Incomparable broke into a predatory smile. Now he would force Big Dream to return everything with interest, and there was no joy or warmth in this smile, only the anticipation of revenge. Meanwhile, the immortal brother and his group had already burst into the cave of bats, and their steps echoed in the stone vaults like a dull echo of the approaching storm. Players vied with each other to ask how to identify the big dream. Identifying signs, a hidden name and level, plus a habit of always walking alone. And in their voices, one could hear the intense curiosity of hunters. And then they finally noticed him, and everyone's gazes simultaneously crossed on the lonely figure which seemed almost invisible against the background of the gloomy walls. Zhang Liu waved his hand at Immortal Brother, and this simple gesture was filled with a silent understanding between those who were used to playing by their own rules. He immediately apologized for keeping him waiting, and his words were filled with genuine awkwardness, rare for a man of his position. The immortal cloth had imagined him to be completely different, and now, having seen him in person, she could not hide a slight disappointment mixed with curiosity. He really did look like a typical weakling. One of the players even doubted whether this guy would be able to carry the three of them, since the mice's stats were simply outrageous, and this thought hung in the air like a heavy question. Zhang Liu shifted slightly in embarrassment, and in this awkward movement, one could see the human vulnerability that he so carefully hid behind a mask of composure. The immortal brother waved his hand, justifying his men's rudeness by saying they weren't evil, and gave Zhang Liu a friendly pat on the back, a gesture that was a mixture of respect and an attempt to smooth over the awkwardness. Even with a 5% pain simulation, the blow resounded with a deafening flash, and for a moment, the world shrank to a single sharp point. Immortal Cloth wanted to intercede for Zhang Liu, and her outburst was filled with a genuine concern that she rarely allowed herself to show. But before she could utter a word, he yelled, "Get down!" And that cry didn't sound like panic, but rather like the honed intuition of a fighter who senses danger before anyone else. From above, from the darkness of the vaults, a huge bat was already diving down on them, its claws flashing like blades, and its wings drowning out all other sounds. He knew perfectly well that these creatures loved to strike from behind, and this simple truth had saved his life more than once. Zhangla rushed to attack. Immortal Brother rushed to help, but did not have time to take a step, frozen in helpless amazement. He was already crushing the monster, cascading damage, and his every move was calculated to the millimeter as if he was dancing with death. He left the bat no chance of escape, and in this ruthless efficiency, one could sense the cold fury of a master. Zhang Lu's blade flashed like lightning, blow after blow without pause or hesitation, and the steel sang its ancient song of battle. And then came the critical hit, and the system spat out 2,900 damage points, and this number flashed in the air, confirming incredible skill. The monster was finished in a matter of seconds, and the silence that followed seemed almost sacred. Now all that was left was to freeze and wait for the reward to fall out, and in this tense anticipation, hope and anxiety were mixed. The immortals stood frozen, stunned by the spectacle, their faces expressing a mixture of delight and disbelief, as if they had witnessed something almost impossible. The archer's token fell again, and Jiang Liu immediately tossed it to the immortal, and in this casual gesture there was a complete indifference to what was a treasure for others. He suddenly recognized the dagger of the fallen in his hand, the very one that held the first place in the weapon ranking, and his eyes widened in sudden insight. They couldn't figure out how he could deal so much damage when he was wearing the most ordinary equipment, and this mystery tormented their curiosity like a splinter. That's why he kept to himself. He didn't want to share the secrets of his strength, because strength isn't just about stats, but also the ability to keep your trump cards to yourself. The four of them rushed further along the winding corridors of the cave, and their steps echoed in the stone silence, disturbing the centuries-old peace of the dungeon. And suddenly a strange sight opened up before them, which made their blood run cold. Ahead yawned three absolutely identical caves, their dark openings like gaping maws, ready to swallow anyone who dared to enter. With no map or clue, they decided to go at random, and in this decision, one could hear the desperate determination of those who cannot afford the luxury of choice. Suddenly, the immortal cloth raised its hand, pointing upward, and its gesture was sharp, almost frightened. There, in the darkness of the vaults, dozens of huge bats hung, their silhouettes resembling ominous shadows, ready to swoop down at any moment. The immortal brother immediately suggested that they turn back and choose a different path, and his voice carried the cautious wisdom of an experienced leader. But Zhang Liu froze, his gaze catching something, and at that moment his face became as impenetrable as a stone mask. It was the same little mouse that had escaped last time, and its presence here seemed almost a mystical sign. He was adamant he wouldn't change his route. The more mice, the better the catch. He might just hit the jackpot, and his words carried the excitement of a gambler ready to risk everything. The immortals grew nervous. If this flock attacked en masse, even Zhang Liu's lightning-fast reaction might not be enough, and this anxiety squeezed their hearts with icy fingers. But he had already waved his hand, ordering the others to move away so as not to be hit. After all, the bleeding skill from these creatures took away 50 units of health per second, and this danger was quite real. They understood everything without further ado, and in their silence, one could hear respect for his experience and intuition. The blade in Zhang Lu's hands flashed, and the steel reflected a dim light for a moment, as if the very lust for battle had awakened an ancient power within it. And the real massacre began, where every blow was a matter of life and death, and the air was filled with the smell of blood and magic. But he couldn't bring down the huge mouse with one blow, and this failure momentarily created a hole in his confidence. The immortals grew cold. Now, the entire nest will be alarmed, and then even their best fighter will not be able to withstand such an avalanche. And then Zhonglu simply disappeared. In a single second, he vanished into thin air, and reality wavered for a moment as if it could not withstand this violation of the laws of nature. And just as suddenly, he materialized 25 meters from his previous place, and his appearance was as swift as a flash of lightning. The immortals were dumbfounded by the sight of this imbalanced skill, and their eyes widened to the limit, absorbing the impossible. The range was impressive, but the cooldown was devastatingly long, and this weakness was a reminder that even miracles have their price. There were 2 minutes left to wait until the next jump, and those 60 seconds seemed like an eternity full of dangers. As the timer ticked, Jiang Lo methodically finished off the nearest mice, and in this measured cruelty, one could sense the cold calculation of the master. The immortals finally realized that he was deliberately luring them out, one by one, away from the nest so as not to raise the alarm. This method was reliable, but it required time and nerves of steel. Thus, Zhang Liu obtained his first quest bat fang, and the trophy sparkled in his hand like a symbol of a small but important victory. He then felled another creature, and its fall echoed with a dull thud that broke the silence of the dungeon. Then another, and another. Each new blow strengthened his position and sapped the enemy's strength. After 2 hours, only one tiny mouse remained alive, and its fragile silhouette seemed almost pitiful against the backdrop of all this bloody carnage. Zhang Liu had risen 2 levels at once and completed the demoness's trial. Now it was the turn of this last little creature, and in this final chord, there was a sense of inevitability. Zhang Liu's gaze jerked back. The immortals had completely relaxed, as if they had forgotten that the zone was teeming with danger, and this carelessness irritated him like the scraping of metal on glass. Some even managed to doze off, and this absurd picture only emphasized the difference between them and those who remained on guard every second. Zhang Lo pointed his finger at the last mouse as if to say, "Here it is, still here." And in this casual gesture, there was a tired confidence of a man who had seen hundreds of battles. The immortal brother exploded with a shout at the party member who had left the game and missed the chance to adopt Zhang Yu's tactics, and his voice was a mixture of frustration and the bitter realization of a missed opportunity. Jingliu himself froze, waiting for the cooldown of Flicker, so that the small creature would not slip away again, like a mocking shadow teasing the hunter. One of the immortals was already rushing forward, burning with the desire to finish off the mouse with his own hands, and in his eyes a passion blazed, eclipsing caution. Zhang Yu rushed to stop him, but he did not listen, consumed by the thirst for glory and victory. He was already rushing towards the mouse, clutching the sword so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and the metal in his hand seemed like an extension of his tense nerves. Suddenly, the tiny mouse opened its eyes, and they flashed with a scarlet light, as if an alien, ominous flame had blazed up in them. And then a deafening ultrasound struck from her mouth, and its wave rolled through the cave like an invisible storm. Its wave threw the immortal back like a rag doll, deprived of will and strength, and he collapsed, stunned and confused. The immortal brother froze for a second, not understanding what had happened, and the world seemed to freeze along with him, obeying the sudden horror. It turned out to be a matting monster, and the word itself sounded in the silence like a sentence, heavy and inevitable. And he had a whole 400 health points, and this number hung in the air like fate's mockery of their self-confidence. Immortal brother barked at Zhang Liu, "Take the others and leave." This creature's characteristics were truly terrifying, and even his firm voice had a hint of fear. But the rest of the team dug in their heels. This was their last chance to stretch their legs, and their tenacity betrayed a desperate determination not to give up without a fight. This time, they were determined to trust the master and follow his every command, and in this submission, there was no defeat but a mature recognition of his power. Then Zhang Liu said something that changed everything. This creature could drop a hidden class token, and those words ignited a spark of greedy hope in their hearts. The immortal brother immediately changed his mind. Such a trophy was worth the risk, and prudence in him overcame caution. Zheng Liu barked at everyone to concentrate and prepare healing potions. He would need all the support he could get, and the demand carried the harsh truth of battle. The master was the first to rush into the attack, and his movement was swift, like a gust of storm wind. He circled the monster like a whirlwind, searching for an opening, the blade in his hand singing its merciless song. At first, the blows were ineffective, and the steel only slid powerlessly along the creature's strange, seemingly impenetrable armor. And then, finally, he broke through the defenses, and that moment seemed to him like a flash of light in the darkness. The monster was caught, and the very fabric of reality trembled noticeably in the air, responding to the turning point of the fight. Zhonglo activated the Eye of Insight. He still hadn't seen a single weak point of this creature, and this uncertainty tormented him like a splinter under his skin. The immortals watched with alarm as the master's damage dropped sharply, and their hearts sank with a sense of foreboding. If even he couldn't handle the monster, the others had absolutely no business being here, and this bitter truth hung between them like a heavy silence. Zhang Liu pounded the creature again and again, but the damage numbers were pitiful compared to previous battles, and this impotence ate away at him from the inside. He didn't see a single vulnerability, as if the monster was carved from solid stone, indifferent to blows. Suddenly, a huge clawed paw whistled a centimeter away from him, cutting through the air with a predatory whistle. And then it finally caught him and dealt him monstrous damage, and reality darkened for a moment, losing its clear outlines. A blinding flash of light, as bright as a supernova, followed across the cave. All the immortals froze, looking at Zhang Liu in horror, their faces distorted with fear and helplessness. He fell into the bleeding state, and his health began to drain away like sand in an hourglass. The monster had already raised its paw for the next blow, and its shadow fell on the ground, promising imminent death. At that moment, the immortals rushed into the battle, covering Zhang Liu with shields, and their determination became a living wall between him and death. And he greedily swallowed the elixir, pulling strength out of the void, and each sip echoed in his chest like a fiery spasm. He himself did not believe that the fight would be so hellish, and he hoarsely asked for a second, and in this voice one could hear not weakness, but a stubborn will to win. Suddenly a hand fell heavily on my shoulder, hard and reliable as a rock. The immortal brother said briefly, "His people will hold out," and thrust ampules of medicine into his palm, and this gesture contained more support than any words. But Zhang Liu shook his head. Just a little more time, and in this refusal there was a stubborn determination to handle it himself. After all, in the end, all hope rested on him alone, and the weight of this responsibility pressed on his shoulders like a leaden weight. Without him, the immortals would not be able to bring down the monster. Everyone knew this, and this truth rang in the air like a taut string. For as long as he could remember, he had always been the one who needed to be taken care of, and that role brought an old, familiar ache to his chest. Yes, he understood this condescending guardianship, but it was a constant reminder that he was weak, and this thought burned him like a red-hot brand. And now, everything had turned upside down. These people nearby sincerely believed in him, and their faith was stronger than any armor. The feeling of being considered strong was tremblingly sweet. He had no right to dishonor the name of master, and this oath rang in his soul. The immortals pounded the monster, but the damage was scattered in tiny numbers, as if their blows were lost in the creature's immense power. Shengxian Su raised her weapon and missed, cursing her trembling, and in her anger there was a bitterness from her own weakness. The immortal brother asked sharply, "Does the master have a plan?" And the question sounded not like a demand, but like desperate hope. He had a plan, but without support, it would have crumbled to dust like a dry leaf in a gust of wind. Zhang Liu shouted, "Let them gain at least a couple of seconds between his attacks." And in these words, one could hear the cold calculation of an experienced fighter. The creature's damage was excessive. It was better to keep their distance, and this simple truth became their only chance. One of the immortals stepped forward silently, and there was a firm determination in his movement. The token in his hand flashed, blinding the cave for a moment, and its light was like a flash of hope. He decided to change his class to an archer and take up the Shengxian Subo, and there was a willingness to risk everything in that choice. Immortal brother rushed to stop Shengxian Jiu. Once the class changed, there would be no turning back, and his cry sounded worried about his comrade's fate. But he nodded firmly. The token was activated, and this moment became the point of no return. Zhang Liu merely watched the whirlwind of events in silence, and his calm revealed the steely composure of a man accustomed to chaos. Now Shen Xianzhou looked at the master as if he were an anchor, and in his gaze one could read a silent request: "Don't let me drown." He burst into transformation. He became an apprentice archer, and a new power flowed through his veins, awakening previously unknown sensations. The new class suited him unexpectedly well, as if it had been created especially for him. He squinted and released the first arrow, its flight as flawless as the movement of a bird of prey. She lunged forward, cutting through the air like a blade, and there was pure energy in her swift flight. And on the first try, it struck the monster, and the blow echoed dully in the cave. The damage was greater than that of the master himself, and this surprise made everyone hold their breath for a moment. But this only enraged the giant mouse to the limit, and its rage filled the space with heavy oppressive energy. She howled and lunged at the archer, her claws tearing through the darkness, revealing its primal destructive power. And behind her, as if from nowhere, Jiang Lo appeared, his silhouette clear and determined against the raging chaos. The monster's eyes glowed with a scarlet fire, and in this ominous light lay the very essence of his power. And at that moment, he finally understood. It was her eyes that were her weak spot, and the revelation struck his consciousness like lightning. Jiang Yu rushed forward and unleashed a flurry of blows on the monster, the blade dealing massive amounts of damage to the creature, and the steel sang a triumphant song of victory. Shen Xianzhou was frozen in shock. Even after changing classes, he was unable to produce such power, and this realization filled him with a mixture of admiration and humility. Zhang Liu barked, "Aim for the monster's eyes!" And the order was not rude, but rather the sheer necessity of the moment. The archer immediately released another arrow, his hand moving with honed precision, and it hit again. The damage flashed like a bright line, and this flash looked like a sign of fate. The others stood frozen, watching their perfectly coordinated work, and their silence was filled with reverent respect. The monster's life bar was melting before our eyes, crumbling into pieces, and every disappearing pixel brought the denouement closer. Jiang Lo thrust his dagger into another breach, causing the damage to skyrocket, and reality itself seemed to shake from the force of the blow. Shangxian Zhou cried out, "Give me another chance!" His voice was filled with a desperate plea not to be deprived of his right to be useful. And Zhang Liu shouted in response, "All hope lies with the great archer." And these words became the most precious confession for the young man. He sent the arrow forward again, his heart beating in time with its flight. But this time she missed and only scratched his forehead, and this miss echoed in his chest like a bitter failure. The damage was pitiful, a drop in the bucket, and this insignificant figure scorched his pride. Meanwhile, Zhang Liu was already approaching a critical strike, and his movements merged into a single, perfectly honed whirlwind. And he struck, precisely, mercilessly, and this blow became the culmination of the entire fight. The monster exploded with a wild howl, shaking its entire body, and its cry was like the cry of a dying world. And then it began to crumble into shimmering dust, and each particle of it sparkled like a tiny fragment of a star. This time, the tenfold multiplier never kicked in, and this small injustice only emphasized that victory is not always about the glitter of the awards. Shengxian Su asked the boss how he knew the master, and he simply said they met by chance at the market. He didn't even suspect how strong he was, and there was a whole story hidden in those simple words. Two spheres of light poured out of the monster at once, and their radiance was so pure that it seemed almost sacred. The first was a Wind Herald class token with a hidden effect that allowed one to change specialization to the hidden Wind Herald class, and the very thought of this power made one's heart beat faster. The second was a Druid class token with a hidden effect that unlocked the hidden Druid class, and these abilities opened up new, unexplored horizons for them. Shengxian Su couldn't hide her delight. Two such tokens at once. Her eyes lit up, as if reflecting the very radiance of good fortune, and her voice trembled with emotion. And two of them, in fact, this unimaginable generosity of fate seemed almost magical, as if the cave itself had decided to reward them for their sweat and blood. According to the previous agreement, one would take Jiang Liu, And in this simple justice, there was a sense of inviolable honor, which he guarded as his main shield. The second was the immortals, and this share was not just a reward, but recognition of their desperate bravery. No one could have imagined that the expedition would turn into such a frantic danger where every step threatened to be the last, and the air was filled with the smell of impending disaster. But it was Shangxianju who pulled the group through this time, giving it his all, and his dedication became the thread that kept them from falling into the abyss. Suddenly, the blade pierced Cheng Xianju sharply, without warning, and the blow resounded in the silence of the cave like a sentence, cold and merciless. No one expected this, and the moment froze, turning into a sharp, unbearable pause where time seemed to break. Brother Immortal rushed towards him, wasting precious seconds, and every step he took was filled with the despair of a man who knows all too well the price of being late. Shangxian Su screamed, her voice breaking into a shriek, piercing and naked, in which pain, anger, and helplessness in the face of sudden tragedy merged. All the trophies were now supposed to go to someone else, and this injustice settled on the soul like heavy ashes, extinguishing the recent delight. It was the boss of the Invincibles, and his silhouette in the dim light of the cave seemed to embody a cold, calculating threat. He struck in defiance of the non-aggression pact between the groups, and this brazen break in vows sounded like a declaration of war, merciless and open. But in essence, they always remained sworn rivals, and the old enmity, long smoldering under the ashes of the truce, now flared up into a bright flame. Especially after the Immortals took the equipment that fell from the Invincibles on the coast, this episode became a bleeding wound in the memories of both sides. And now they even dared to conduct raids together with their guild's personal enemy, and this insolence only added fuel to the fire, igniting hatred to a blinding heat. The Invincibles' boss barked, "Give me all your gear and dog tags now, and I might let you die quickly." His voice rang with the icy confidence of a man accustomed to dictating terms. Brother Immortal stepped forward, covering Zhonglu with a wide shadow of his determination, ready to take the first blow. But he waved his hand sharply. "Take your men and leave. I'll deal with the Invincibles myself." And in these words, one could hear, not bravado, but the calm, hard-won confidence of a master who knows the value of his strength. Suddenly, a player who had only taken first blood 4 times and whose payout was exorbitant stepped out of the shadows, and his appearance was like a predator emerging from the darkness, inevitable and terrifying. In his hands, a huge blade flashed predatorily, reflecting the dim light of the cave, and the steel seemed to whisper of hundreds of spilled lives. He grinned and said, "Well, will you dare to go against me?" And in this mocking phrase, the usual game with someone else's fate was evident. Brother Immortal suddenly remembered him, and the past came flooding back, resurrecting old disputes and bitter defeats. The forums were filled with debates about who was stronger, him or Jiang Lu, and these endless discussions became a legend living its own life. It was the bloodthirsty Mad Blade from the Invincible, and his very name sounded like a clap of thunder foreshadowing a storm. Zhang Liu's gaze instantly caught sight of his hidden class, and that brief flash of understanding was like a lightning strike, instantaneous and all-pervasive. Their guild had already launched copters. This dispute was supposed to be closed live on air, and millions of eyes were now eagerly catching every movement. It was a one-on-one fight with no room for error, and the air around them thickened with a tension you could almost touch. And Zhang Liu accepted the challenge without hesitation, and there was not a shred of doubt in that calm nod, only a cold readiness to face fate head-on. The Mad Blade burned with arrogance and an obsession with power. No matter what he picked up, he was interested in only one result: maximum critical damage. And this thirst for destruction became his essence. Until that day, no one had been able to defeat him in a duel. He had already stepped into the hidden class, and his strength seemed almost mythical, unattainable for ordinary fighters. Brother Immortal hastily suggested marking the hidden tokens to at least slightly increase the chances of victory, and in this desperate attempt, one could feel all his anxiety about the outcome of the fight. After all, the master simply had to win, and this thought pulsated in the temples of each of the immortals, becoming their common prayer. Zhang Liu silently clenched the tokens in his fingers, and the metal beneath his palm felt warm with tension, as if absorbing his determination. But he didn't activate it. He simply handed it over to Brother Immortal for safekeeping, and this gesture conveyed the calm confidence of a man who doesn't chase immediate benefits. Now was not the time for hasty decisions. Haste was disrespect for one's own outcome, and he knew that better than anyone else. Big Dream stood still, looking incredibly cool, and in his stillness one could sense a strength that didn't need any unnecessary movements. Mad Blade quipped. Did he need time to prepare? He would accept no mercy under any circumstances, and his words were a cold mockery of someone else's pride. But Jiang Liu didn't need that, and in his silence, one could hear the confidence of a master for whom fighting is an extension of breathing. The next second, the enemy rushed to attack, and his movement was swift, like a lightning strike tearing apart the sky. He unleashed the vortex slash with a furious speed, and the air groaned under the force of his fury, turning into a whirlwind of steel and wind. Zhongli barely had time to realize how fast he was, and for a moment his consciousness froze, trying to catch the elusive trajectory of the deadly dance. The immortals froze, clenching their fists. Everything inside them ached for the master, and every nerve was stretched to the limit, responding to every blow. But he slid to the side, gracefully avoiding the blows, and his movement was like the dance of a shadow escaping the light. Jiang Lo activated Bounce, and the space trembled for a moment, obeying his will. The Mad Blade coldly noted his honed reflexes, and something akin to respect flickered in his gaze, quickly hidden behind a mask of disdain. Zhang Liu activated the Eye of Insight, and the world around him became transparent for a moment, revealing hidden lines of strength and weakness. And he broke through the defense, inflicting solid damage on the enemy, and the steel sang a triumphant song, cutting through the enemy's armor. But he only gripped his giant sword tighter, and in that silence, one could sense the unwavering will forged in 1,000 battles. Mad Blade calmly blocked the third attack from behind, his defense as flawless as if carved from a single piece of ice. Zhang Liu realized he needed a different approach. He decided to exploit his agility and try to kite the enemy, turning the battlefield into a labyrinth where speed would be his primary weapon. His agility was at the level of 89. It was almost impossible to believe, and the numbers seemed to mock the laws of physics. But even with this indicator, coping with the Mad Blade turned out to be hellishly difficult, and every moment gained came at the cost of incredible tension. He didn't have a single wasted movement, and his fight was like a perfectly calibrated mechanism where every detail worked with ruthless precision. It was as if Mad Blade had read his opponent's triple combo in advance. His defense was calibrated down to the millimeter, and it seemed as if he could see the future. Even though Zhang Liu had already dealt him a good 500 points of damage, he didn't even reach for the potions, and this resilience inspired an almost superstitious fear. It was terrifying to realize how much health he had, and this figure seemed like a mockery of the very idea of victory. Big Dream's speed and maneuvers were truly top-notch, but Mad Blade had already figured out all of its patterns, and this bitter truth scratched at his consciousness like a sharp splinter. As long as he blocked the third strike, Zhang Liu's damage didn't pose a serious threat to him, and this inexorable logic of battle squeezed his heart with icy fingers. In the comments, viewers were already exploding with delight at the Mad Blade, and their cries merged into a single, enthusiastic roar, raising him to a pedestal of invincibility. The Invincible's boss barked out an order to station men at the spawn point in front of the Batcave, and his voice carried the predatory confidence of a hunter driving his prey into a trap. As soon as Zhang Liu respawned, they would circle around him, camping him until his level dropped to 0, and this plan was as simple and merciless as the blow of an axe. Once the Big Dream was over, he planned to lure Mad Blade into the Vertical Alliance. Then the guild's fame would skyrocket, and he would finally receive the long-awaited promotion, and this dream shone before him like a beacon in a storm. Meanwhile, the clash between the two strongest players raged on, but even at maximum attack speed, Zhang Liu couldn't break through his opponent's impenetrable defense. Big Dream's attacks stung like blades, but Crazy Blade saw through every trajectory, and this flawless defense seemed almost supernatural. The immortals looked at each other in panic. They did not understand how he managed to heal himself, and this mystery tormented their minds like a splinter under the skin. For the master, this fight became a real torture, and every blow echoed in his body with sharp pain mixed with the weight of responsibility. The Mad Blade grinned predatorily. It was time to show the enemy what true critical damage was, and his smile was filled with the primal joy of a predator sensing the weakness of his prey. His eyes seemed to be bloodshot, blazing with a scarlet madness, and there was nothing human left in that look. He swung his gigantic sword with a roar and brought down the blow, putting all his fury into it, and the earth shook from the power of this thrust. Zhang Lo noticed the strange skill charge and immediately tried to scan it, but the alien power eluded him like smoke through his fingers. But the enemy's health bar remained impenetrable, hiding all the numbers, and this secrecy only increased the tension, making every moment unbearably long. As he swung his sword, the Mad Blade already saw the death of his enemy in his mind, and this confidence gave his blow additional destructive power. For Jing Liu, the situation had become life-threatening, and cold sweat ran down his back, reminding him of the fragility of life. The Mad Blade activated Hurricane Barrage, a storm of blades rushing forward, and the air filled with the whistle of steel, heralding the end. If not for the lightning-fast dodging skill, this strike would have wiped Jiang Liu's health to zero, and the very thought of it made his heart clench in an icy spasm. The skill Crazy Blade had a short cooldown. He could repeat the attack at any time, and this threat hung over Jiang Liu like an upraised sword. Zhang Liu desperately hoped for a pause of a few seconds before the next activation, and these moments seemed to him the most precious treasure in the world. And, seizing this moment, he rushed into a counterattack, and his blade flashed like lightning, piercing the enemy's defense. This way, he managed to inflict at least a little damage on the enemy, and even this drop of power was more valuable to him than gold. But he had no intention of giving up, and in his tenacity one could sense an inhuman will forged in the flames of endless battles. The Hurricane Barrage flared up again, dealing devastating damage to the master, and each new blow extinguished the last of his strength. Zhang Liu screamed in pain, feeling his body burning, and this scream was not an admission of weakness, but a challenge to death itself. He had no right to surrender, and this simple truth became his shield, stronger than any armor. With one sharp movement, he snatched the potion. Only 12 units of health remained, and this a tiny number hung in the air like a mockery of fate. But the Mad Blade only grinned mockingly, and in that grin one could see contempt for someone else's weakness. It seemed that even the legendary master could do nothing against the bloody saber, and this thought tormented the immortals like caustic acid. The boss of the Invincibles was already mentally celebrating. Soon their name would thunder throughout the world, and this victory would be the crowning achievement of his ambitions. The Mad Blade believed that the era of his bloody saber was about to begin, and his eyes reflected a future where he was the absolute ruler of the arena. But Zhang Liu only thought coldly about the spoils. He would gladly take everything that fell from the enemy, and this calm confidence was more terrible than any rage. Today, luck was finally about to turn its face on him, and he clung to this hope like a drowning man to a straw. He waited a long time, gritting his teeth, hoping that the blade would work as it should, and his whole life seemed to be compressed into this one decisive moment. The Mad Blade was absolutely certain that the enemy could no longer do anything to him, and this self-confidence became his blind spot. And he struck again, hammering damage into his already fragile health bar, and every pixel of fading life echoed in Zhang Liu's chest with a sharp pain. But Zhang Liu needed just one chance, just one blow, and fate finally heard his silent plea. The dagger flared, and the damage soared to almost 4,000, and this number flashed in the air like a sign from above. This was something Mad Blade certainly hadn't expected, and for a moment, his perfect confidence cracked, revealing human surprise. Zhang Liu wiped him off the face of the earth with one blow, and that moment became the turning point, where willpower triumphed over brute force. The Mad Blade froze, unable to believe his defeat, and his posture expressed not so much pain as shock from a collision with something that shattered all his notions of the world. The entire Invincible group froze. 4-digit damage seemed impossible, and this incredible figure hung between them like a silent sentence. And the immortals exploded with jubilant cries. Their master had won an incredible victory, and this triumph was not just a win in a game, but a triumph of a spirit that could not be broken by any blows. The chat instantly filled with heated discussion. Emotions were running high, and the flow of messages rushed like an avalanche, sweeping away everything in its path. The Invincible's boss couldn't accept it. Instead of destroying Jiang Liu, they had only helped him become a legend, and this bitter irony of fate ate away at him from the inside like a caustic poison. He barked furiously, "Turn off the stream immediately!" And the order didn't ring with authority, but with the helpless rage of a man whose triumphal march had turned to disgrace. Upon killing the enemy, two items fell out, and their radiance momentarily blinded even the most seasoned players. The hidden class change token Blade Breaker had an effect that unlocked the hidden class of the same name, and the very thought of such power made the heart beat faster. And the unique treasure map of the White Fox clan, thin as a sheet of parchment, but concealing within it entire worlds of possibilities. But suddenly, two players appeared behind Zhonglu and shouted sharply, "Put it all back!" Their voices sounded like the scraping of metal on glass, upsetting the fragile balance of victory. The Invincible's boss roared, giving the order, "Everyone on him! Attack at once!" And the cry echoed through the cave like thunder, heralding a new storm. But the immortal brother rushed forward, and his movement was swift, like the flight of a hawk pouncing on its prey. And he dealt a critical blow to the invincible boss, and the steel sang a triumphant song, cutting through the armor and the very arrogance of the enemy. The advantage always goes to the one who strikes first, and this law of battle is older than the guilds themselves. The defeated player immediately dropped the trophy, and its shimmer momentarily eclipsed even the reflections of his recent triumph. Now the odds were 4 against 3. Jiang Liu issued a challenge. Would the Invincibles risk continuing the fight? And his gaze revealed the cold calculation of a man accustomed to playing with fate. They accepted it, and in their determination, there was a sense not so much of courage as of a stubborn unwillingness to bow their heads. But not all. The two brave men suddenly realized that they were alone, and this sudden emptiness around them became louder than any scream. And without wasting a second, they darted away, chasing after the others, and their silhouettes melted into the semi-darkness, like ghosts frightened by their own shadows. The Immortals and Jiang Liu merely exchanged glances. That was all their vaunted team spirit, and in this silent exchange of glances, there was a bitter smile at human nature. Immortal Brother handed Jiang Liu 2 hidden tokens, his hand shaking not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. He was determined to return them to their rightful owner, and in this simplicity of gesture, there was a sense of true honor, rare in a world where everything was bought and sold. In response, Jiang Liu gave his brother the medals and equipment that had dropped from the Bloody Blade and the World Lord, and asked him to consider the hidden token as thanks for protecting him on the beach, and there was a quiet but unwavering pride in these words. Jiang Liu kept only one token for himself. The name made it clear, an assassin class with a frantic attack speed, and this laconic selection spoke volumes about him. The immortal brother could hardly hold back his tears from such generosity, and these unshed tears were more precious than any reward. Shengxin Su once again began to persuade the master to join the clan, and her voice rang out like a taut string full of hope and anxiety. But Jiang Liu politely declined the offer with a slight smile, and within that smile lay a whole story, the story of a man going his own way. Immortal brother said quietly, 100,000 star coins had already been transferred to Jiang Liu's account, and these words hung in the air, heavy and meaningful. Jiang Liu froze. He certainly hadn't expected such a sum, and the world froze for a moment along with him, listening to this unexpected turn of events. He remembered perfectly well. They had agreed on completely different prices, and this unfair generosity scratched his conscience like a sharp splinter. After all, in this bat cave, the Immortal Clan had obtained dozens of class medals and 2 hidden class medals, and each of them was a step to the top, paid for with sweat and blood. Thanks to this, the Immortals now had every chance of breaking into the top guilds, and this prospect beckoned like the distant light of a lighthouse. And all this was only because Jiang Liu was leading them, and this simple truth echoed in his chest as a warm but heavy feeling of responsibility. Moreover, he had just publicly crushed Bloody Blade, the strongest solo player, and now he was officially recognized as the strongest player in New Origin, and this title fell on his shoulders not like a crown, but like a steel hoop. The Immortal Company's leadership gave the order to do everything possible to establish friendly relations with Jiang Liu, and behind these dry words lay a whole strategy built around one figure. They were more worried that they had paid too little, and this concern from the management was both flattery and a burden for Jiang Liu. Hearing this, Zhang Liao sincerely thanked him for the generous payment, and there was not a drop of pretense in his gratitude, only a calm acceptance of what he deserved. Here their paths diverged. The immortals hurried out, eager to celebrate their victory, while the master was eager to explore the new location, and this thirst for knowledge burned within him brighter than any celebration. Shengxi and Su tried to bring up the clan again as if to say it was worth trying again, and her persistence showed not just devotion to the cause, but genuine concern. In the future, Jiang Liu's name would inevitably become a nightmare for every player, and this thought that slipped through her words hung between them like the shadow of an approaching storm. He decided to check where the dark branch led and whether there was an exit, and this quiet, almost imperceptible step into the unknown was the beginning of a new chapter. It was rapidly getting colder all around, and there was not a soul in sight, and this ringing emptiness seemed unnatural, as if the world was holding its breath. The new source was frightening in its terrifying realism, and the line between the game and reality became thinner and thinner, almost invisible. The piercing cold no longer resembled a normal game effect. It chilled to the bone, penetrating into the very essence, and neither armor nor spells protected from it. Suddenly, Jiang Liu's legs began to move with increasing difficulty, and each step became difficult, as if the ground itself was resisting his advance. And then it was as if they had frozen to the stone, and this icy embrace was as merciless and cold as eternity itself. From the black depths of the cave came an eerie sound, and it sent shivers down my spine, promising something ancient and deadly. It was a chilling squeak, thin and piercing, as if the air itself was moaning with horror. It was emitted by a mutant ice bat demon, and its silhouette in the darkness seemed to be the embodiment of cold and death itself. Zhang Liu never imagined that he would encounter a level 25 monster here, and this unexpected encounter hit his nerves like an ice shower. The ice bat rushed upward, tearing the air with a terrible howl, and this sound pierced the consciousness, depriving the will and strength. This wave of sound made my knees buckle. It was impossible to stand, and even the steel of my will could not resist this primal force. This monster was even more insane than before, pure rage in icy armor, and there was no logic or pity in its movements, only blind, destructive energy. He was terribly ferocious, with eyes full of cold and death, and in those bottomless pits there was nothing human left. Having immobilized its prey, the creature slid closer, looming over Zhang Liu, its shadow covering him like a shroud. The ice gripped his legs like steel. Zhang Liu couldn't even move his feet, and this helplessness burned him from the inside, eating away his confidence. An icy thought flashed through my head. This is where I will die. And it was cold and calm, like a sentence that could no longer be appealed. He yanked open the interface. He needed to change classes urgently, and his fingers flew over invisible buttons in a desperate attempt to cheat fate. It was better to lose progress than all equipment, and this bitter logic of war dictated its merciless rules. But the fingers did not have time to confirm the choice, and the moment froze, turning into a thin line between life and death. Someone's voice cut through the space, and the monster was suddenly bound by invisible chains, and magic flashed like lightning, breaking the icy grip of darkness. Paralysis gnawed at his body, freezing his movements, and even the creature's fury could not overcome the iron will of the spell. A new spell flared with a fiery command, "Incinerate the enemy!" And the words sounded like an ancient hymn of destruction. And at that very moment, the monster was hit with critical damage, and reality shook from the power of this blow. One single blow, and the numbers flashed into a 5-digit number, and this incredible figure seemed almost mythical. And then, Lady Lunaria emerged from the shadows, her silhouette clear and majestic, as if she herself were part of this ancient magic. Since he was still alive, the test lay ahead, to withstand 3 of her attacks without falling, and this new threat fell on Yang Liu's shoulders like a heavy but inevitable burden. This was definitely not what Zhang Liu expected, and for a moment the world around him lost its familiar contours, turning into an arena where the stakes were higher than life itself. He needed to defend himself right now, and every second of delay could be fatal. Lunaria's fist flashed a millimeter from his face, the air cracking with speed, and the moment stretched out, revealing the very essence of the danger. Zhang Yu made an instant decision and disappeared in a flash of teleportation, and space trembled for a moment, accepting his escape. The speed and strength of this devil was truly terrifying, and even seasoned masters trembled at the thought of her wrath. Zhang Liu's reaction was excellent, but he had become too reliant on his skills, and that self-confidence now seemed as fragile as glass. Lunaria moved faster than thought. Even the Eye of Insight couldn't keep up with her shadow, and this elusiveness made her almost divine. Zhang Liu lost sight of her again and again, as if she had dissolved into thin air, becoming part of the darkness itself. A hidden token flashed in Zhang Lu's hands, but he immediately doubted whether this class could overcome the power of the wind spell, and this uncertainty scratched his consciousness like a sharp thorn. Unable to bear the doubt, Lunaria gave him a sharp slap on the top of the head. This is the only legacy of the temple. Every gift must be valued, and in this sharp gesture one felt not cruelty, but the stern wisdom of a mentor. She still couldn't believe that Zhang Liu had managed to snatch the wind spell, and her amazement was mixed with respect and disbelief. Lunaria gloomily admitted the guy was incredibly lucky, and his divine connection was completely beyond the ordinary, and this anomaly worried her like an inexplicable natural phenomenon. Now she had no right to reveal her cards and simply threw out, "Consider this a hidden parameter of luck. It directly determines fate, reveals secret possibilities, and literally holds life in the palm of your hand." And in these words, one could hear an echo of ancient prophecies. However, a great gift always comes with an exorbitant price. She could feel in her bones that the reason for his presence in this world was strikingly different from the motives of the other players, and this secret hung between them like a heavy veil. Lunaria clearly felt that his real body in the previous world was balancing on the brink of death, and this fragile thread of life gave his every action a special poignancy. This game turned out to be far more insidious than Zhang Liu had imagined, and each new turn revealed abysses before him that he had never suspected before. Lunaria harshly curbed his curiosity. Unnecessary knowledge would bring trouble, and when he mastered the temple's legacy, then he would figure everything out, and in her sternness one could sense the concern hidden behind the stern shell. Zhang Liu felt like he had taken another step toward solving the mystery, and this tiny bit of progress was as sweet as a sip of water in the desert. He decisively activated the class change to Bard, and the system confirmed class changed, status, apprentice, and these dry words signaled the beginning of a completely new path. The shift went off without a hitch, and even this technical perfection seemed like a good omen. Zhang Liu immediately rushed to the stats. What superpowers did he have now? And his heart pounded in anticipation of new possibilities. But reality hit him in the gut. Bards are a support class. They have no offensive moves, and this harsh truth hit him like an icy wave. The news nearly blew his mind, and for a moment, the whole world shrank to one unbearable thought. He had lost before he had even started. He stared at Lunaria, hoping she was just making fun of him, and his confusion was evident in that desperate look. She promised to teach him 3 skills, but he dug in his heels. He demanded 6, and in this stubbornness one could sense not greed, but a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. After some heated bickering, they settled on 4, and this compromise figure became a fragile bridge between their differences. But learning, of course, cost money, or rather, valuables, and this inevitable price for knowledge was as ancient as the temples themselves. Zhang Lo exploded with a cry. "You fleece me blind every time!" And in this indignation, one could hear not only resentment, but also a familiar, almost friendly squabble. Thus, the amethyst sword disappeared from his inventory, and this loss echoed in his chest with a quiet but sharp pain. The bandit, in the guise of a mentor, still pumped up 4 skills into him, and her movements were precise and confident, like those of a master who knows the value of every gesture. Zhang Liu's eyes devoured the description, and every line seemed like a key to new horizons. He could now immobilize a target for 3 seconds, but in exchange, he received a 100% bonus to incoming damage. His attack and agility increased by 50%, and this ambiguous power was both a gift and a curse. He couldn't believe that the bard's skills were so ambiguously powerful, and in this contradiction, the true magic of the class could be felt. Lunaria nodded coldly. Her mission was complete. He would train on his own from now on, and there was no indifference in this detachment, but only the harsh necessity of giving the student wings so that he could learn to fly. But Zhang Liu's mind was still full of unanswered questions, swirling around like autumn leaves, unable to find peace. Suddenly, his gaze caught on something below, and this tiny glimmer in the semi-darkness attracted his attention like a magnet, not allowing him to look away. The token that had fallen from the ice demon bat gleamed dully on the floor, its cold glow seeming almost ominous, as if it held within itself echoes of ancient icy magic. The Ice Marksman class change token unlocked a hidden class of the same name, and the name itself rang in the mind, promising icy fury and deadly precision. Lunaria watched him from a distance. Her eyes narrowed, and her gaze was a mixture of curiosity and stern assessment, as if she were weighing his soul on invisible scales. His divine connection was so thick and bright that even she couldn't see it fully. She wanted to see if he had the courage to challenge himself and not break under the weight of that power. Ahead, at the end of the tunnel, a light was glimmering, thin and timid, like the first ray of dawn after a long, endless night. Zhang Liu let out a sigh of relief, finally a way out, and this sigh was not just the movement of his lungs, but an acknowledgement that he had finally escaped the icy clutches of death. Beyond the cave, the plain of dreams stretched out, its vastness beckoning like the outspread wings of a fairy tale bird. It was like a fairy tale come to life, but its beauty also hid a threat. For the most beautiful illusions sometimes conceal the cruelest traps. But not everyone rejoiced at his rescue, and the silence that thickened at the exit was heavier than any cry. The entrance to the cave was tightly cordoned off by the 12th Squad. They were hunting an ice demon bat, and the plan was for no one to leave, as if fate itself was written in their tactical notes. These were high-level players. Brother Shengxian had once mentioned that their guild was sponsored by a large corporation, and behind that support one could sense a cold, calculating power that knew no mercy. It seemed they had come specifically for that very mutant monster, and their calculations were as flawless as the blade of a perfectly sharpened sword. They had calculated everything. Getting out of there alive without getting past the ice bat was technically impossible, and the very thought that someone had disrupted their flawless plan ate away at them from the inside. No one understood how Zhang Liu had survived at all, and this mystery tormented their minds like a splinter that could not be pulled out. But if he had pocketed the 12th Squad's spoils, it was better to return them amicably. Otherwise, problems would be inevitable. For the wrath of that guild was like an avalanche, sweeping away everything in its path. Justice Cupcake was known as the fastest stormtrooper in the 12th Squad, but this brat cold-bloodedly blocked her blow with a simple dagger, and this audacity amazed even the most seasoned fighters. And then they looked closer and realized this was not just a blade, but golden equipment, and its shine was not just the shine of metal, but a sign of the highest quality, rarely found even among legends. The boy, hiding his name and level, clutched a golden dagger, a master of close combat, a loner who had cleared out the entire bat cave, and in this silence his figure seemed almost mythical. They instantly identified Zhang Liu and immediately calculated how much valuable loot they could get from him, and these calculations flashed in their eyes like cold numbers on a screen. He froze in amazement. How did these players even know him? And this question rang in his head like an alarm bell warning of an approaching storm. In the 12th Squad, there had long been whispers that this man was a living treasure trove, and if he did not want to make mortal enemies, he should immediately hand over his weapons and emblems, and in these whispers one could hear not a threat, but a cold sentence. The girls coldly advised him not to even think about resisting. Both had hidden classes that emphasized pure attack, one extra move, and they would send him to the respawn point, and the guys from the squad would be keeping watch at the respawn, so it was better to give everything in a good way. Their words didn't sound cruel, but rather a habitual, almost mechanical confidence in their own strength. Zhang Liu instantly realized that they wanted to turn him into a personal ATM, and this bitter truth burned into his consciousness like a drop of molten metal. Suddenly, an arrow shot into his chest, and its flight was as swift as a flash of lightning tearing through the sky. He howled a spell, calling upon the speed of the stars, and his voice merged with the roar of the wind, awakening the dormant power. His agility soared to 134 units, and he slid to the side, dodging the blow, his movement like the dance of a shadow escaping the light. The 12th squad player narrowed her eyes sharply. He'd changed classes. And in that exclamation, there was more than just a fact, but an acknowledgement that the rules of the game had just changed. The Wind Summoner's heart sank. This was the very class emblem the party had been desperate to obtain at any cost, but they were too late. He had already activated it, and the loss felt like a blow to the very heart of their plans. Hesitating was a death sentence. They had to immediately unleash their skills and wipe Zhongliu off the map, and this need rang in their nerves like a taut string about to snap. They were already anticipating how he would experience the full power of their skills on his own skin, and in this anticipation, one could feel the almost animal joy of hunters chasing down prey. This girl had great speed and strength, too. She wanted to play with him a little to draw out the pleasure, and her smile revealed a cold, predatory grace. But Zhongliu was already plucking from his memory a spell capable of crushing the enemy formation, and his mind worked with cold, calculating precision, discarding everything unnecessary. The girl had already raised her fist, cutting through the air for a crushing blow, and a whirlwind of energy hummed around her, promising imminent death. And he intercepted her hand with frightening ease. And this gesture was not just a block, but a demonstration of strength that did not need extra words. Her strength bonus was considered the best skill in the squad, and he stopped it as if it were play, and the carelessness in his movement was more terrible than any scream. But there was no time for complacency, and the moment of triumph crumbled, giving way to the harsh reality of battle. One of the archers immediately released an arrow, and its whistle cut the air like a sharp knife. Too slow, he didn't even strain to dodge, and his calm seemed almost mocking. The arrow hit the ground with a dull thud, and the dull sound sounded like a warning, quiet and ominous. And suddenly this blow finally broke through his defense, and reality cracked, revealing the fragility of even the most refined technique. It was an explosive arrow, a cunning trap, and its cunning lay not in its strength, but in its surprise, which could ruin any plan. He let his guard down for a second and got caught, and that tiny mistake could have cost him everything. There was no choice but to activate Numb, and this decision was not a choice, but a last line of defense. The girl froze, unable to move, and she was frozen in an absurd, almost comical pose, and the contrast between her menacing appearance and this helplessness was almost surreal. Jiang Liu carefully pretended not to notice this, and his restraint did not convey mockery, but the cold discipline of a master. But the second girl immediately realized the catch. The wind spell had no numbing effect, and this logical inconsistency scratched at her consciousness, demanding an immediate answer. Meanwhile, her friend was already being torn apart by someone's blows, and the steel sang its merciless song, leaving no room for doubt. And the damage they dealt was mercilessly critical, and every number that flashed in the air was like a hammer hitting an anvil. Arrows again shot towards Jiang Liu, a whistling swarm of death, and the air thickened with tension, saturated with the smell of steel and danger. Now he had only her to get even with, and this thought was not a relief, but a new burden of responsibility. Explosive arrows whistled again, but this time Zhang Liu darted to the side, miraculously avoiding the blow, his instincts working at their limit, squeezing out every drop of possible power. These arrows were deadly. Even if you dodged, the blast wave still burned, tearing off chunks of health, and each such burn was a reminder of the fragility of life. With no more allies around her, she fired recklessly, holding back neither her fury nor her power. And there was a desperate determination in her relentless attack. Jiang Liu suddenly activated Paralyzing Motive, and the spell worked, giving him a chance to deal damage, and this moment was more precious than gold. But the effect lasted only a couple of seconds, no longer than a flash, and the time allotted for action melted away like ice under the scorching sun. The very next moment, she gave him a harsh rebuff, and her counterattack was as swift as a snake's strike. This player had a monstrously high defense, like the walls of a fortress, impenetrable to ordinary blows, and this impregnability inspired involuntary respect. Then Jiang Liu decided to activate the tenfold damage from Fallen, and this move was akin to jumping into the abyss. Risky, but the only possible one. And she continued to fire arrows without stopping in a continuous, deadly burst, and her tenacity was as frightening as an inexorable force of nature. He blasted her with the paralyzing melody again, the sounds of the spell intertwining with the roar of battle, creating a strange, almost hypnotic rhythm. And seizing this moment, he rushed forward, thrusting the blade, and his movement was swift and precise, like a lightning strike. But the fallen was still silent. Even with the song of the god of war, the damage didn't increase. Something was clearly wrong here, and this inexplicable silence in the system felt like an ominous omen. The next moment, the immobilization was broken as if it had never been there, and the fragile hope of an advantage crumbled to dust. All his bonuses to agility and attack shattered like glass, and this sudden loss of strength struck his nerves, robbing him of confidence. The girl coldly assessed his skills, but she understood perfectly well that he needed much more time to reload, and the mathematical precision of her calculation was almost frightening. Furthermore, Jiang Liu was now unable to deal critical hits, and this vulnerability left him almost defenseless against her power. She raised an eyebrow slightly, and in this barely noticeable movement one could read not surprise, but a cold assessment of the situation. And she decided to show him something like mercy for a second. And this pause was not kindness, but the play of a predator enjoying the moment before the decisive throw. All this time, she had been wearing hidden equipment that gave her complete immunity to critical hits, and this detail, hidden until now, was now becoming the key to the entire battle. She also managed to take the elixir. Now she was fully armed, and her confidence was felt almost physically, like a wave of strength emanating from her. And now, feeling absolutely confident, she was going to have some real fun. And in this confidence, there was no arrogance, but only the cold joy of a master who has met a worthy opponent. It was almost an honor for her to have Jiang Liu as her training target, and this strange form of respect made the fight even more intense. Watching him rush about like a hunted animal gave her a strange, almost predatory pleasure, and in this observation one could sense the ancient, instinctive joy of a hunter. But Jiang Liu still had one more ace up his sleeve, and this last hope burned within him like a tiny but stubborn flame. And strangely enough, he too was pleased with this fight, and there was no madness in his satisfaction, but only a sober recognition of the value of a test that hardens the spirit. It was damn good that this enemy turned out to be so tenacious, and this assessment of the enemy was the highest form of compliment for him. Jiang Liu exhaled starry breath, a skill that wrecked the balance by giving insane stat boosts, and this surge of power was akin to a rebellion against the system itself. He used it, even without a mana potion, on pure adrenaline and stubbornness, and this will, overcoming physical limits, was his true weapon. But the girl only grinned. She was sure that he would not be able to penetrate her armor anyway, and in this grin one could feel the calm confidence of a person who had seen everything. And he struck again with paralysis, as if he was never going to give up. And in this persistence, one could feel not just the will to win, but something more, an almost fanatical devotion to his path. She couldn't help but notice his icy stubbornness, and even through the haze of battle, something akin to respect flashed through her mind. And then Jiang Liu hurled the Thunder God's curse at her, a spell that doubled the pain, and his voice sounded like a clap of thunder tearing through the silence. Now he allowed himself a short, cold smile. It was his turn to enjoy himself, and there was no malice in this smile, but only an acknowledgement that the game had finally become truly interesting. And at that moment, it finally dawned on her what class was standing before her now. And the realization of this hit her consciousness, turning all previous ideas about the enemy upside down.